Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session of Beyond the Buy Box podcast. I'm here joined with my dear friend and former partner in crime back in my good old Vic days, Catherine Vodola, who I'm super pumped to have a chat today. I'm such a huge fan of yours, Catherine. I'm excited.
Thanks.
And for folks who have not had the chance to crossed paths yet with Catherine. She is a senior marketing executive who's held several roles across quite reputable organizations, most recently coming from Spectrum Brands, leading the global marketing for pet care business, was at Bic working on a variety of categories, and then also was with Godiva and many others. And you've sat in these really fascinating roles of reinventing the brand, repositioning well established brands, trying to keep up and get ahead in established brands and categories that are explosive growth with a lot of new entrants into the category. And, one of the things that I think is your superpower is this ability to just understand and keep the consumer experience at
Mm,
the center. Meanwhile, like, you're super savvy at knowing what's happening on the ground.
mhm.
So let's dive in and start with a perspective of disruption. Across brands that you've worked on, you know, tell us maybe some stories and experiences and what disruption you've experienced, particularly in the online kind of e-commerce channel.
So I have a great example, sort of thinking about our discussion today that actually doesn't relate to online, but the learnings of it actually do very much apply to sort of the environment that we're in today. And it really sort of talks about, or it is sort of a master class in like what not to do or how to think about things when marketers are facing disruptions. As you mentioned, I spent the early part of my career at Godiva, which is a premium chocolate brand. It was started in 1926 in Brussels, and it really grew up as this super premium, luxurious brand that had unbelievable equity. And it really started as a retail brand. So all these beautiful boutiques that were, on Rodeo Drive, on, Fifth Avenue in Tokyo and Paris, and obviously in Brussels. And it had a really, really strong stature. And starting in, like the mid, maybe around 2010, we started to see this sort of shift in behavior where consumers started to really think it was worth investing in and trading up into premium products, especially in food and beverage. So that's when Starbucks got really big. People were buying expensive jeans, and that was absolutely happening when it came to chocolate. And two of the strongest brands, Lindt and Ghirardelli, which are amazing global brands, started to sell their products in mass. Places like Target and CVS, in grocery stores. And they were basically bringing the premium experience to consumers in places that they were shopping every day. And, coming from the insider perspective at Godiva, there was a feeling of, we would never do that. We have the most prestigious brand. Our consumers would never, they would never be okay with us going into grocery stores with our products. And we therefore sort watched and resisted going into these sort of accessible locations for a long time and really missed the fact that consumers were no longer willing to get into their cars and drive to a mall or drive to a standalone boutique just to get a candy bar. And in missing this or in waiting to sort of jump into this environment for a few years, we were basically behind the eight ball in seeing a consumer behavior that had happened and this disruption that was happening. And it took us a long time to sort of jump on that trend. But the point of the story is oftentimes marketers, especially ones that work on iconic brands and have grown up in a very traditional sort of brand setting, that have spent years building brands, years building innovation, focused entirely on the consumer. When something disruptive happens, oftentimes we become paralyzed, and we oftentimes miss these big moments for us to react and to jump in, be agile, sort of deal with it head on. And we sometimes are like, well, the consumer doesn't really know what they're doing, and they're going to come back to us. And if we don't see things and address them immediately, then oftentimes we're left behind. And so that's very much the experience that's happening on places like Amazon. And as the consumer moves less offline and more online, there's a whole different game out there, right? Very different rules, different rules of engagements, different players. And it's really important that we sort of are humbled and we react and we, sort of look at the environment and react differently. Otherwise, all of our hard work will not pay off as brand builders.
Such a fascinating, 'cause I can imagine coming from a very long established organization that had a playbook that worked for many, many, many years,
Yeah.
and that it would be very easy to not see in the moment when these big moments are happening and like a shift in the consumer behavior. I do
Yeah.
think, and it's a really great parallel to kind of the barrier to entry continues to get lower and
Yeah.
lower as consumers become more open to get what they want when they want it. Talk to us a little bit about your experience in, the profile of other brands that can show up in these marketplaces, also as disruptors, whether it be premium or non-private label or alternative brands in categories that are coming in and working the system.
Yeah.
They're able to really understand the digital environment, how they hook in a shopper on these platforms. Share with me just some of your experiences, perspective there, and helping
Yeah.
brands navigate that complexity to hold on to like control.
So I think that the one thing I would start with is I don't actually think that these disruptions are easy to miss. I think what oftentimes happens is companies, especially established companies, actually do see it happening, but they don't actually internalize and act. For example, we definitely saw what was happening. I think there's a bit of a denial. We've been watching the consumer go online, which is great. I think, brand leaders love that. We want to make sure that we are focused on the consumer and creating services and products that meet their needs. But there should be no surprise that these low cost producers or these other products are coming into the mix, and we need to sort of react in a different way. And I think the most dangerous thing that we can do, and I think this is sort of like a theme that I want to sort of land on throughout this discussion, is that we need to be humble as brand leaders. We always say that we won't lose sight of the consumer, but the consumer wants outstanding products at a reasonable price. And when other entrants come in and create these great products and great propositions, we need to make sure that we are examining, what is making them successful and how do we fit into the mix given these new entrants. And I think it's really important that we go back to really understanding what makes us different. So going back to sort of like the traditional roots of like get into a conference room and make sure that you're really clear with what your brand proposition is. Why are you different? Why are you better than these new entrants? What makes you special? And make sure that as the scene and the environment gets more crowded, that you're very clear with what your proposition is and why you are different and better at delivering against the consumer than what some of these low cost providers are creating. How long have you been doing this? What's the expertise that you're bringing to the market? What are some of the claims that the consumer will want to know that make you better than some of these low cost providers? When those low cost providers are not there, you don't necessarily have to really
Mhm.
hone in on some of these clear benefits because you're the only game in town. But as the world becomes more competitive, it becomes really important that you are very clear with why you are different than the competition. Make sure that you're looking at these competitors as real competitors versus annoyances, and really learn and see what they're doing well, and make sure that you're delivering your experience in a very sort of seamless, cohesive way so that you look as attractive and as compelling as these new competitors.
It's so interesting. We've had a running theme of monitoring the activity and really paying attention and measuring the impact. And that may be in ancillary categories. They could be a close cousin to the category
Yeah,
you're working in, but they still impact a shopper's choice or a consumer's
yeah,
choice on which option are they gonna click to buy?
yeah,
And I do think, being very, very precise and doing as much research and sort of thorough investigation of who's winning the buy box in these various
yeah,
settings. And I love that you just said, look at these as all equal competitors. Back in my J&J days, you say these are the ankle biter brands. But fast forward to, to today, these are your number one, number two, number three, number
yes.
four that are gaining share albeit small, but being very, very disruptive to so many different categories.
Yep. That's exactly right. And I think that reflects, whether we recognize it or not, a bit of insecurity and a bit of concern. The best business people are the ones that are open to learn, who are looking at this and saying, not like how do we make them fail? It's more of like a, what are we doing and what can we do to be better to make sure that we are competing against them? And because the consumer doesn't hear us whining.
Mm,
So I would say, going back to your point of like looking at like doing research and like who's winning the buy box, the best thing that we can do is to act like consumers. And so, going on whatever category that you're in, and you and I talked about a, example of, like, I had been looking online at other brands in our categories, other brands that were in adjacent categories, and realized
mhm,
that a lot of these upstarts, they're brilliant marketers. Looking in some of these like sort of high touch categories, they're showing these beautiful sort of ways to incorporate products, or like, I'm thinking specifically about appliances, and
mm,
thinking about how you can incorporate that into other categories like your own. So thinking about other ways that your competitors are showing up. Are they doing videos? Are they doing instructional videos? Are they shooting things in different ways? And really looking at them as sort of inspiration yourself, because oftentimes those of us with bigger budgets, or have done a lot of things the old school way, we're missing the point of like the new way that brands are bringing things to market with consumers. Because 10 years ago or 15 years ago, distribution was on the retail shelf, right? And you had to be an established brand to get into the store, and so you had a
yep.
leg up. Right now, everything is equitable, like it's democratized. And so a small brand has equal opportunity as a big brand. And they're working really hard to make sure that they're coming across as a really strong established brand. And oftentimes big brands take it for granted what they've built. And so we need to make sure that we are constantly looking at some of these up and coming brands and making sure that we're learning from them.
Absolutely. It's interesting, and the nature of the work, wearing kind of my full-time hat with Hatu, that, a big part of what we help brands look at is who is acting on your behalf, taking your product and merchandising it and featuring it and marketing it in ways that's going to get a consumer to buy your item versus the brands. And it's interesting, although, there's 99% of the time sort of a conviction of like, let's take them down, which is, big mission of the brand.
Yeah.
It should be the brand's right to own and take control. Now, interestingly, it's a game of speed. And
Yeah.
you talked about this a little bit of like, how do you work swiftly? I do think, sometimes when it's like, oh, I'm a little concerned, or like maybe I don't know how, but in these moments where you need to act and you
Mhm.
have to rally to act fast, share just some experiences and how you've mobilized teams to get something off the ground that finds this balance of, look, we can't be behind. It's
Yeah.
not going to be perfect. It's going to break a little bit of the kind of the rhythm and the
Yeah.
standards and the processes that, many brand partners are used to following. But what are some of the things in order to buck the trend a bit that you've seen?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to do both. So and I think you can do both. So I think the great thing about online is that you can put something up and take it down almost instantaneously, right? And so when you're thinking about the old way of doing things, you would spend so much time testing everything and making sure everything was perfect, because you could really only do it once. And that's just not the game anymore. There's so much more opportunity to test and learn. I'm a big believer in getting probably 85% there, because it's the last 15%. It's like the first 85% happens fairly quickly. It's the last 15% that tends to take the longest. And so if
Mm,
you wait to 100%, then you're just adding years and years, and then you've missed the boat entirely. So I think that you want to make sure, from a brand and from a product perspective, the most important thing that I would say is getting your proposition right, and making sure that, and that's not just like, if when you say moving fast, it's like, it's like changing out your content or creating a new product, launching a new product. I think that it's really important to be very agile and move quickly with this 85% rule, but you will not succeed long term unless you're super clear with what your proposition is, your brand proposition. And I want to
Mm,
differentiate between your brand proposition and
yeah,
brand building, because
sure.
brand building takes a long time, right? But brand proposition is being really clear with who you are, what you're selling, and why it is different than your competitor. And oftentimes, if you don't have that clear, you can do all the marketing, you can get out there, but if a consumer buys it and it's terrible, or they're like,
Mhm,
oh, I could just get this from someone else, then you
mhm,
lose. So, like, say I'm going to start a new company and it's Catherine Vodola cookies, and I'm going to create a new
yeah,
cookie. When companies and products are born out of a need, we don't just come up with them out of the blue. They're
yeah.
always based on like, hey, there's a gap out there and I think I can do something better, right? And so if I identify what that need is and what's my product, what's my pricing, what are the three things that make me different versus the competition? If you can't answer those questions, then you don't have a solid proposition. You're creating something different versus what the consumer can buy. And that could be just as good as this other competitor, but 25% less. It's really about the value. Mostly it should be differentiated, but it could be same but less expensive. That I think that if you don't sort of sit down and get that clear in the beginning, I call that sort of making sure that the house and the foundation is set before you open the doors and let everyone in.
Mhm.
That I think you have to spend some time on, but that can happen very quickly.
Being able to move quickly and dynamically, especially when you're mentioning, other outside global manufacturers that can come and do this, whether they're lower cost, similar type of offerings, but they're brilliant marketers. How have you navigated working with sort of maybe even small organizations that have a certain way of doing things? And how do you advise and work with teams and organizations to move at the level of speed and agility to keep up and hold on to that buy box?
So I think that, like you said, whether it's a large company or a small company, the most important thing for a company or a brand to do is be super clear with their brand proposition. Really being clear with what your product or offering is, who's the consumer, what is the problem that you're solving, and why is your product different versus the offerings that are competing against you. Become sort of the North Star or the sort of brand identity for what you're doing. And that could be I'm creating something that is more premium ingredients. It could be efficacy claims. It could be lower cost. It could be I'm just as good, but I cost less. It could be a multitude of different things, but being really clear with who you are, who you're serving, and what makes you different is critical for being a point of differentiation for the consumer. So when the consumer comes on and they're ready to make a choice, there's a clear point of view and a clear position of why you are different and why you are meeting the needs that is different than all the other options that they're going to see on the page. And when you have this clarity, which oftentimes takes, it could take years if you're a big brand, but honestly, like you should get into a room and you can basically solve this like within a couple days, just like go through the process. Once you have this becomes basically like your handbook. Everything derives from this, whether it's innovation, whether it's advertising, whether it is supply chain, whether it's pricing, everything needs to ladder up to this identity. And when you're clear with this identity, I sort of think about this as being like your foundation. Once the
Mm.
foundation of the house is done, then you can open the doors and you can do whatever you want because you always know who you are. And so if something, comes up and it doesn't fit within that identity, then you say no. If something comes in and it's aligned to that, or you want to do new innovation and you're like, well, this is how we would do it based on our identity. Once you get that done, everything becomes much faster. If you have that foundation set, you can always sort of come back to that and you're able to answer it, to act, to address, to move quickly because you have that foundation set and you know how you should do it in your own way.
You can get analysis paralysis, especially when things are moving quickly in an environment like Amazon, Walmart, eBay. Everyone's moving super, super fast. And the ability to ticket to entry and kind of establishing and holding, you could change things in a snap of a
Totally.
finger. And so by having at least a center and making moves and having a level of confidence that you can tie
Yep.
to this kind of center. I love that. Maybe the last area, if you were to leave our guests with one or two, three, however many sort of tips in holding on to, the integrity of all the work that gets put into brands. Yes, there's so many things in the periphery that kind of get thrown as curveballs, especially, in the digital commerce arena. You've shared so much already in
Yeah.
terms of like centering, but leaving us with the last few nuggets. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think that when things get really competitive, especially if you're a big brand that's used to just a few competitors, oftentimes when competition gets fierce and there's a lot of disruptive brands that come in, you start to lose your way. The most important thing that you need to do is being really, really clear with what your consumer and value proposition is, articulating that and making sure that you are clear how you are different and better than the competition. And if you are not, what are you going to do about it? Because it's oftentimes as these disruptors come in, they are doing things just as good as you. And that leads me to my second point or my second piece
Yes,
of
please.
advice, which is be humble. A lot of us who've grown up in building these amazing innovations in these brands, it's very jarring when you see disruptors coming in. And oftentimes our reaction, and this is like with our friends and family, this is just human nature, is to
Yeah.
be dismissive, to be defensive. The reality is that the faster you not deflect, but deal with, be humble and realize what are they doing that is better or different or what's going on and am I as competitive as I was before? What do I need to do? Is it talking about things differently? Is it wow, I should probably add some things to my offering to make myself more competitive. But be humble. Don't assume that it's going to go away. Don't assume that just because they don't have a massive brand that they are going to go away because that is just not what's happening right now. So be humble and see the reality of what's going on and learn and adapt and look at that as your next marketing challenge. I think the third thing I would do also is, and this one's a little harder, is to be brave. Oftentimes with brands, we're very scared to make changes. We oftentimes feel like we can't change that identity or we can't do this because we haven't done it before. And I would just say be brave. Figure out ways that you can adapt to what's going on in the current world because that's the consumer that we're dealing with. And I'll give you a good example is, when
Yeah.
that that Louvre heist that happened,
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple months ago. I remember following the Guggenheim. So I followed the Guggenheim. I follow a
Mm,
lot of museums, and the Guggenheim posted like, "Hey, come and visit us. We don't have a jewelry collection." Guggenheim is this huge
mm.
institution, right? But they came out with this tongue-in-cheek, like really funny, sort
Yeah.
of response in the cultural moments. And I would say, be brave because the world is changing and you want to make sure that you are staying connected with consumers and adapting with them.
Such great advice. This element of experimentation and moving fearlessly. I feel like I just got like a master class in
Uh,
marketing. I'm like revived today,
We're
Catherine.
all marketers. We're all marketers. Don't we all want to be marketers? It's so much fun.
I'm taking down every single thing that you just said.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
I love it though. And with your experiences, they're very simple lessons, but ones that oftentimes needs to be brought to the forefront
Yeah. Yeah.
and reminded of. So thank you so much. And thanks for
Oh,
sharing your examples and taking us through a little bit of, a peek into your arsenal of businesses that you've worked on and perspective. It's been wonderful.
my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Jen.